Hey guys, Brass Facts here. Welcome back to another Brass Facts Friday video. You're counting down the hours until the weekend, likely on your lunch break that you're probably taking for a hair too long. I think in the firearms industry, we like to solve a lot of our problems or desires or mission sets with caliber selection. I'm shooting 5.56, but I'm having shitty terminal performance at range. Boy, I better go up to 308. 308 not quite doing so well at 1,000 yards. Better go up to 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm kind of bored of all of the above. Hi, my name is Hoplophile. I bought two 6.5 Grendel guns. Or I guess if you're the military, oh boy, I just got engaged by a Dishka at 2,500 meters at the end of a terminal arc of these rounds. Better buy into Overmatch and develop an entire weapons program to solve that problem. But interestingly so, and that's going to be the topic of today's video, I've seen that in a lot of ways, choosing different bullets within a single given caliber has almost as much, in some cases more of an effect on what you're able to do with that firearms, that weapon system, than switching to an entirely different caliber. As you guys know, I don't know anything at all. I'm actually not even a sentient being. I am actually just literally a puppet controlled by my dog, Nova, over here, and she uses me to fund her treat addiction as she gets out into her old age. So I went out and found someone to help me kind of talk about the discussion of bullet selection. Now, that's actually not at all what happened. This person actually came out to me and birthed the genesis of this video, but that doesn't flow nearly as well for the introduction of a video. So regardless, today I'd like to talk about bullet selection, specifically with 5.56, as that is America's cartridge. Everyone knows about 5.56, and it acts as a good medium to kind of discuss the different capabilities of the round and what we can do by simply changing bullet selection and what bullet designers are looking for when kind of creating and designing the perfect round. And perhaps, maybe, answer the question of, is there a perfect bullet that we can get within the 5.56 platforms to solve all of our problems? Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jessie. My channel is Boondock Ballistician, and as the name might imply, I do have a background in ballistics. Formerly educated as a materials engineer with a master's degree, but I was very fortunate to be able to take that and kind of redirect that knowledge into the world of guns and ballistics. So
okay, so you work with bullets.
I work with bullets. Yes, a lot. I get paid good money to work with bullets and to shoot guns.
So in order to answer the goal of this video, what is the best round for my given task, we kind of need to understand all of the subcomponents of performance, namely terminal ballistic, how the bullet does on target, external ballistics, generally the discussion of how the bullet does during its actual flight path, as well as how the bullet does going through different mediums that aren't our target, basically think cover, branches, and more. Let's start with terminal ballistics.
When you look through gel and you see that really big expansion, that's it parting, right? The energy is being transferred so fast that there's kind of a degree of separation between the round and the target material, rather than that direct one-on-one contact. People now say the temporary or permanent cavities, but the idea is that you look at things in slow-mo and you'll always see that initial impact, but then what's left behind is going to be your actual destruction on target, whatever that may be.
Yeah, not to completely nerd out, I've always visualized it as elastic deformation and plastic deformation almost, right? So elastic deformation is kind of like your rubber band. You pull it out and it slingshots back to where it originally was, and that's kind of the elastic capability of the medium. And then you have plastic deformation. That's like when with your paperclip, you do it enough times that it permanently deforms. And that seems to be the rifle, in a lot of cases what we see with rifles, we're hitting such a high energy threshold that the round is exceeding the capability of the medium to absorb energy, and it begins to tear and destroy.
Terminal performance, thus, at first glance, seems to just be a discussion of energy being dumped on the target. More energy, more better. That checks out, and after all, energy is what's causing the damage, so ultimately more of it the better, right? But that brings up an interesting dichotomy that seems to contradict this. If more energy is better, why is 5.56 so terminally effective? It is not a particularly high energy round in the sense that basically everything else supersedes it in the rifle category. Why did 5.45 by 3.9, a very similar round to 5.56 functionally, completely supplant 7.62 by 3.9, a round with almost 20% more energy than 5.45. In theory, if it's an equation of energy, why are these smaller yet super fast rounds beating out rounds with notably more kinetic energy?
Energy transfer, it's not being put into target as well. And I think this goes back to a misunderstanding of what like your gel block shots look like as well. Like your temporary cavity, that looks great on camera. That looks beautiful, and you see a lot of that in your.
That's the thing where they shoot it, and then the slow motion,
that nice big slow-mo bubble,
and then they stop the picture at that, and then they put it on the website. But you're saying that doesn't really matter, that part, right?
I don't think we care about that, and it's not that we don't care. Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of that, and people think like, I don't know, I'm not calling out any specific gun tubers here, but you see a lot of them shoot at gel, and they get that big slow-mo moment. And they're like, wow, look how effective that round was. That's so cool. And it's not. You're not seeing the effectivity. You're seeing that energy be dispersed, but in an ineffective way, because the gel has that elasticity to come back from that. What really you need to look at is what's being done with not only in that permanent cavity, that line that's there, but where it starts to do that bubble, whether it be the temporary or permanent cavity, at what point in the block they're shooting at. And then as well as once the temporary cavity kind of snaps back into place, like on 7.62 by 39, when it snaps back in place, the residual damage that's going to be in that temporary cavity is going to be very different than the residual damage that you might see from, like 5.56 or whatever else you're shooting. Temporary cavity can do damage. It can have absolutely devastating real-world effects, but it's not that big blow-up that you see on camera that does it. It's once it recedes, what's left sitting in that cavity.
So it seems like, in broad strokes, yeah, it is a question about energy transfer, but perhaps a more accurate way of putting it would be how that energy is transferred, assuming the threshold of energy transfer is reached in the first place. Or perhaps put another way, what the bullet does when it impacts the medium. I wouldn't call it modes of failure, but that's kind of what's happening. The round is disintegrating, essentially. Can you get into that a little bit?
Modes of failure is 100% what we call it. That's exactly what's happening. That's what you want to happen. The idea is that you're going to make your bullet unstable when it hits the target, right? And that depending on the material properties that you have, the construction of the actual projectile, how the round withstands that super heavy force upon impact.
Of these modes of failure, I find fragmentation to perhaps be one of the more interesting ones, and it does a lot to explain why 5.56 does disproportionately higher damage compared to that aforementioned 7.62 by 3.9, which has more energy, yes, but doesn't seem to have that mode of failure.
In order for a round to fragment, you do have to reach a velocity threshold, otherwise it won't be able to perform. But in order to get that fragmentation, you have to pretty quickly kill that velocity upon impact with your target. And it becomes its own kind of limiting factor, because now you have to really come across what it's doing. So high velocities, right, as they're moving, if it gets too high, if the spin's too high, your round will fragment while it's flying before it even hits. And it's not going to behave well once it does hit. But the idea is that once you get those velocities to the right point on impact, you're going to see that elastic strain that's occurring keep the target material in contact with the round as it's moving through.
This whole dynamic explains basically a lot of the reputation these rounds have gained. Absolutely, they're extremely lethal for their size and their given energy level, but they're also, in a lot of ways, inconsistent, especially when we begin to tinker with the starting parameters of the original round's design spec. You know what I'm talking about. Shorter barrels at farther distances. When we remove the consistency of fragmentation and are only left with the chance of tumbling, we get a round that has a tendency to ice pick targets, that is, go in one end, right back out the other end. It also ignores the entire aspect of external ballistics. That is how the round deals with, well, other things, namely wind, but also targets on the way to your target.
So a round is considered barrier blind if its terminal performance is minimally impacted upon impact with the target, right? You're not going to see it immediately start to crush and tumble and fall apart. It's going to be able to go through with little resistance and then continue along its flight path into perhaps whatever other intended target you had for it.
The 5.56 can't go through a twig memes come from, right? It's that the round sometimes performs too good and the thing turns to confetti, which is what it's designed to do, except that wasn't your target, that was an intermediate to your target.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. And another thing, we keep coming back to yaw. So yaw in target, right? You think of that for your failure mechanisms. Yaw in air is something that's super important. So this is what I have my little drawing for.
Okay.
Very technical, you can tell. I worked
Excellent,
hard.
yeah. That Masters is paying off.
So you can picture like your yaw path, right? So this is it spinning as it goes. And I kind of drew a line here because as it's spinning, its effect on target, what we call like that angle of attack, if it's up here, it might be phenomenal. You might have the best round ever. And then as it starts to spin more and come down and go under that line, suddenly you have a piece of shit paperweight and you might as well be chucking like a Post-it note at someone.
So you're saying like if the round impacts sideways, it's going to kind of do this.
Yep.
And it's going to struggle to get through because you're hitting it broadside. Yeah.
Absolutely. Angle of attack is so important when you consider round performance because, I mean, you get some rounds that are yaw independent and that's not going to matter for them. You have much more flexibility in the ways that you can shoot them.
Okay, so I think I just asked this, but to be sure, do some rounds do more of this while some rounds only do this?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's like the M855A1, that's considered an EPR round. Mm-hmm. The whole reason that is absolutely loved and sought after, it doesn't yaw. Like realistically,
so it's just jiggling with a little bit of precession, and that's about it.
Yep, okay. And that's what makes that so good in performance is you're able to remove any of those outside factors and you know exactly where it's going to be in its cycle along any point in that flight path.
Come on, I mean, you guys know who Blue Alpha is. Blue Alpha makes a lot of belt kind of ancillary gear, so they obviously make this outer belt. They make the inner belt, which I've actually been using for an EDC belt for, geez, how long? 8 months now? 9 months? And my friends have been using for well over half a decade at this point. They also make, outer belts, as you can see. I'll be real, the Brass Facts is not that big of a fan of battle type belts, but I use and partake in them occasionally, like right now when I really just want to focus on pistol drills and I don't really want to work too much on like concealment drills. I notice I am framing this perfect. So yeah, if you need some belt stuff, be it inner belts, outer belts, and actually I brought it with me here today, my regular, Cobra Buckle style EDC belt. Go ahead and go check out Blue Alpha.
So let's finally, now that we have some of the prerequisite knowledge, try to answer that question. What is the best round for 5.56? I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards 77 grain OTMs. After all, the military sort of did a similar thing when they were having trouble in the GWAT with FMJs, and thus had to quickly solve the problem of we need a better bullet, and thus ended up with Mark 262, a functionally similar round to 77 grain OTMs. It also certainly helps that AAC is now selling 77 grain OTMs for 70 cents a round and on sale for 50 cents? That's basically as cheap as I can get M193 sometimes. So what does Jessie think about 77 grain OTMs?
That circles back to the conversation of yaw. You're increasing that grain size, you're stabilizing it better, you're reducing those ballistic coefficients as it flies, and you're able to get a much more consistent flight path. So that nice little drawing wave I did starts to become much slower and stretched out, as opposed to what you're seeing with, the lighter grain versions of the round. Allows you to have that better trajectory at that point. But I will also say, 77 grain OTM, depending how you're using it, might not be what you expect. If you were to shoot it into a gel block, it would take much longer to start failing in the gel than if you were to shoot M855 or M193.
Yeah, okay, that's actually a theory I've had for a while now, is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, this is a personal theory, that M193 and M855 is actually superior to 77 grain if you stay within the M193, M855 operational window. So in a lot of ways, that is the better round compared to a lot of other rounds like 77 grain, 262, even out of shorter barrels if we stay, say, within 100 yards, even out of a short barrel. And if we go to a longer barrel, that might be 200 yards and in, right? There isn't really any magical properties or amazing terminal performance of 262/77 grain type rounds, right? It's just once the M193, M855 begins to kind of exceed its operational window, that's where it kind of comes in. Not necessarily as better, just not, it doesn't have that huge drop in performance, right?
Yeah,
Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You hit that dead on. I completely agree with your assessment on that, and I'm sure people will have different opinions, but it comes down to what you're intending on using the round for.
All right, so we've talked about 77 grain. It does a good job, though it does come with some limitations. We've already talked about M855A1 as being a very consistent round, especially in terms of barrier blind performance, though admittedly you can't really get all that much of it without just having a friend that can steal it off a National Guard truck. But what about soft points? I've seen a lot of people recommend hunting soft points, something like Federal Fusion, as a pretty decent cost-effective way. Well, by cost-effective, I mean like $2.50 a round cost-effective, so not even slightly cost-effective. But it does give you a much more consistent mode of failure by ballooning the round on the tip rather than relying on fragmentation, which, as we've seen, incredibly velocity dependent.
Really close to that limit, but not going over.
All right, let's ask her opinion on soft points. Now, coming to you live from what I think is a cell phone microphone. We maximum production value here on the Brass Facts channel.
But because you have that exposed lead, you're able to take advantage of the better expansion and balance out that penetration performance. These rounds are usually more blunt at the tip. Obviously that's going to vary, but because of that you do wind up seeing a decrease in flight performance since you're increasing drag. But soft tip ammo does give a good advantage compared to something like FMJ, if you're considering it for things like hunting or self-defense. Firstly though, if you're looking for that barrier performance, then obviously FMJ or a semi-jacketed like steel tip or whatever is going to be your better option. But something like Gold Dot, where it's a bonded round, is actually going to give a lot different of performance compared to your unbonded rounds. A lot of people like to consider bonded rounds and they see like the weight of the projectile is going to be maintained throughout its flight path, which is obviously a huge advantage. A lot of people are going to associate that advantage with lethality, but really the idea is that since you're able to make it one piece, since you're able to maintain that weight, you're able to achieve better penetration power, right? Meaning, yeah, you know, for like a duty round or something, they're going to be able to go through their car glass or better through like thick clothing, something like that, whatever.
So what about those solid material rounds, like say those solid copper rounds that kind of have a mushrooming effect built into it?
Your solid copper round, obviously it's going to be a lot harder than lead, meaning that you're going to have to apply more pressure to get that round into the bore, and you're going to see a lot more fouling in the barrel. But the design does remove a lot of the failure points that you see with something like your jacketed hollow points. That denser material is going to allow those rounds to maintain their shape longer, meaning that you can hit higher velocities, maintain that integrity on impact with barriers, and see overall an increase in performance. But I will say with that though, one disadvantage is that the copper rounds are not going to really perform at lower velocities. If you're shooting something with a lead bullet, lead core, it's going to perform great at lower velocities. It's easier to expand, that lead's more malleable. So depending on the circumstances, your copper tip might not be giving you what you're hoping for.
So, 19 minutes and 45 seconds into the video, I think we're finally equipped to take a stab at that question. What is the best round for 5.56? Obviously, this is going to be my opinion, so take it with a huge grain of salt, 55 of them perhaps, And consider also watching this primary and secondary video. Doc GKR is the main guest, and his toenail clippings probably have more ballistic knowledge than I will ever have in my entire life. Just be warned, if you think my videos are long, Landfair has zero compunction on uploading long videos. I think he secretly gets off on pressing the upload button on a 5-hour video, and this one is no exception. Put it on for your next commute. Shit, put it on for your next 5 commutes. Unless you live in LA, this might get you about halfway there. Anyways, holy shit, ADD much, right? Let's answer the question. Well, it depends. I think a lot of these performance metrics are give and take, and a lot of them are contradictory. For home defense, life is pretty simple. You brought a rifle to a home defense fight. Basically, any round you find is going to tick the box of devastating terminal performance. In fact, all we really need to worry about here is over-penetration. That is, our round basically zipping through 7 different walls and coming out on the other end still lethal. Interestingly here, our humble FMJ round offers a pretty decent fit. It's cheap, it's plentiful, and the biggest criticism of M193 tends to be that it explodes and turns into confetti when coming into contact with almost nothing, which is actually what we want here. Things get more complicated, unfortunately, as we extend out in different scenarios, the more spicy scenarios, and as range increases. Of course, I think the popular choice right now is looking at OTM-type rounds. The military did it, after all, to be the kind of magic, and Mark 262 has gained near mythical properties online. Obviously, if long range is the objective, then yeah, OTM-type rounds are specifically designed to do exactly that, and it's going to be your main choice. However, as a fighting rifle do-it-all type round, while the OTMs are not bad, that extra mass certainly does help. I think it's a bit backwards in terms of solving the problem. These are not cheap rounds by any means, and they were not designed with any terminal performance in mind as a primary design goal. There's a slight caveat here, as I mentioned, with 77 grain AAC OTMs, which are just mediocre OTM rounds, and don't have any special, sauce behind them. They cost basically the same amount as green tip, and offer a kind of a easy way to give it a little bit more oomph, especially in, ironically, shorter barrel setups without murdering the bank. However, once again, this is obviously my opinion, despite all the finagling over the years of trying to find that perfect holy grail round, there's some stuff out there that gets really close, especially a lot of these LE duty rounds. Law enforcement have, by their very nature, a complex mission set. They need to engage targets with good terminal performance, but they also don't want their round to overpenetrate drywall after drywall. But then on top of that, they need rounds that also at the same breath offer some degree of barrier performance against cars, auto glasses, doors, you name it. This sounds like a complete nonsensical set of challenges, but it turns out bonded law enforcement loads are kind of, what do the kids say, goated with the sauce? These are pretty versatile rounds. They are essentially a soft-pointed round that have good barrier performance. So, short of being a light armor penetrating round, it's about as good as it gets in a lot of ways. And you also look really cool because your casings are nickel-plated. The really only downside is that these are really hard to get from the civilian side of things, and often they're out of stock in so many different places, and then when you do find them in stock, these things are comically expensive, so much so that in a lot of ways it makes more sense to hire a PMC than emptying a combat load of these guys. So anyway, jokes aside, it's actually a really good round, and people kind of just sleep on it and try to, find the magic bullet, when in reality, in a lot of ways, it's been kind of in front of us this whole time. At least that's kind of what I think. Try not to get lost in the sauce here. I think it's very easy to try to view all of this as like a RPG-esque damage simulator, and more bullets with higher damage is the obvious choice, which it obviously is, but at the end of the day, the most important aspect is making your bullet actually impact the target, and preferably somewhere important on that target, and everything else is going to be gravy on top. Of course, if you can afford it, if you can make it happen, get a nicer bullet. You should actually make sure your skills are up to snuff instead of trying to hope that a bullet is just going to make you better than anyone else, or, as we've seen recently, a barrel length is making you better than anyone else. And that's that. Thank you, Jessie, your Boondock Ballistician, for coming on the channel and kind of helping me out with this one. And for you, the viewer, you can go thank her, because she will provide you an extra dog clip at the end of the video.
No, you don't want to play tug of war anymore. No.
What is a Furminator?
I don't even use this on my floor mats anymore. I just use it on animals to walk up to my truck asking for use that. That was wild.
She wants more. Just pick up her legs and rotate. No, by the legs. Rotate by the. Pick up the legs, both sets, front and back, and then rotate over.
Poor dog. Girl, I don't believe that worked. That was okay with me.
She's so dirty.
What a goofy girl you are. A lot of this is just
You want a Furminator?